This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss.
Welcome to the Open to Hope Show in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here with my co-host and mother, Dr. Gloria Horsley. Welcome to the show, Mom. Today we're going to be talking about finding hope after a stillbirth, and our guest today is Lindsey Wimmer. Lindsey Wimmer is the executive director of Star Legacy Foundation. She is a pediatric nurse practitioner, a nursing professor at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota, and a mom to 3 children at home and 1 son who was stillborn in 2004 at 38 weeks gestation. Welcome to the show, Lindsey.
I just wondered, you had a stillbirth son, and were you a nurse practitioner at the time?
My focus is in pediatrics, and so for the latter part of the pregnancy, I felt like I was more concerned about the infections that could happen, the things like traumatic birth type things, prematurity, things that are a lot more well known. And of course, even looking forward into some of the things that I knew I had to worry about once the baby was born, that this one really just kind of hit me out of the blue. I didn't realize the extent of the issue that there is, where healthy moms with healthy babies and healthy pregnancies could end in such a devastating way in today's day and age. And as a nurse practitioner, I was rather embarrassed for quite a while that I didn't know this and that I didn't realize how often it happened. But when I started getting into the research and looking a little bit more, I understood why that was. And it's because there is so very little awareness, research, education, and support for many of these families.
So, Lindsey, how did your son die?
It's expected to be a umbilical cord accident. All the other testing and everything else that was completed was completely normal. The only thing abnormal was that he had an extremely long umbilical cord that was wrapped around him in 7 different places, and in many places very, very tight.
Did he die while you were delivering him, or did he die before that?
He died before that. One night, my husband and I were sitting on the couch watching the news, and we were laughing because he was moving around like I had never felt before. It was the most crazy movement. And looking back now, I think it was not the cute movement that I thought it was at the time, but it was so abnormal. It definitely caught our attention, and we went to bed that evening, and I woke up a few hours later with just a sense of doom. I knew something was wrong, but I could not put my finger on it. I still didn't really even have any symptoms, and it took me a little while to recognize that I hadn't felt him move in a while, or certainly since I had been awake. And so my husband and I then went to the hospital to have things evaluated, and that's when we learned that his heart was no longer beating.
Well, I think this is really good for a lot of our listeners out there, because here you are, a pediatric nurse. You know a lot about babies and, having a baby, et cetera. And yet you didn't 100% know. You didn't know what was going on, because I hear a lot of moms saying, I wish I had known, or I should have known. And the reality is it's hard to know these things, it sounds like, at the time.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that haunted me, and probably still haunts me today, is that I didn't know so much that I should have done. And the other thing that I hear from women over and over, and I experienced it myself, is not trusting our own instincts. Those maternal instincts start even before the baby is in our arms, and we don't necessarily give ourselves credit for that. We also, rely on the books and the information that we're giving, and that's all fantastic, but so much of it just comes from that intuition. And things like, if I had known that, baby being active in a way that was so unusual could be a problem, that who knows? I mean, I could probably play the what if game all day, but it just makes you wonder. And I know certainly there are families that do have that abnormal abnormal symptoms or abnormal behavior on part of the baby that is a signal to them that something is going on. The other thing that I remember too is that when I woke up and I knew something was wrong, but when I opened up all my books and I went through the checklist of I didn't have a fever. I wasn't cramping. I wasn't bleeding. You go down the little checklist of things that says to call your doctor if. And I didn't have any of those. And so it took me a couple of hours to convince myself that it was worthy of calling the doctor, given my concern, even though it wasn't something on the list. And it came back to I felt silly, and I didn't want to bother my doctor at 2:00 in the morning for something that I hadn't been given permission to call about. And when I talk to obstetricians and midwives now, they all, their hearts just sink when they hear those kinds of things, because they say, I tell my patients to call me whenever. And I have to tell them, but that doesn't necessarily, our patients don't necessarily feel that empowered, or they don't trust themselves. And we need to have better conversations about that, because we don't value that intuition enough.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about the shame and guilt factor of losing a child. I have to tell you that I had a lot of shame and guilt. My son was killed in an automobile accident with someone else driving, but I still felt shame and guilt. I felt that I should have protected him, that I should have done something else. As you said, the what-if game. So I think that's probably a pretty normal part of the grieving process for anybody who's lost a child. So I wanted to ask you, how have you dealt with that, and what do you recommend to other people? Because I know a lot of people are feeling those kind of feelings.
I think you're exactly right that that's a huge part, and I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. I can't imagine other than how it relates to my experience, but I know that for stillbirth mothers, it's a huge part of it, especially because it happens within inside of their body, and some of that. Mm-hmm. Some of that guilt even is expressed by other people. Just this last week or so, I've been working with a family, and when people heard about their story, the first comments were, "Well, what did you do wrong?" Mm-hmm. And that's really perpetuates a lot of that guilt and shame that really traumatizes these families additionally for a long time to come. For me, I think creating the awareness has been therapeutic for me, doing what I can to let other people know. It took a long time for me to accept myself that I didn't do anything to cause this. I was very fortunate that my husband and my family were adamant and very vocal about the fact that they never once blamed me, or that they knew that I did everything I thought I absolutely could to protect my son. And just hearing it on a regular basis was enormous. And then finally using that to kind of create awareness and help educate others has been very therapeutic for me. The only thing I really find that is really helpful for other mothers is just to keep reinforcing that we always do the absolute best that we can in the circumstances that we're under. And hindsight is always a very different situation, but we can only control what we know in the moment, and to know that we did all that we can. And to know that our child knows that we mothered them in the very best way we knew how, and with all the resources that we had available to us, and that we would change it if we could, and having trying to just find a place of peace and comfort with that. But it's, as you know, it's very challenging and often just takes a lot of time.
So it sounds like just normalizing it and letting people know they're not alone and these feelings are normal. And I've had 2 miscarriages, and I certainly had a lot of guilt about what I did, and did I have too many Diet Cokes or whatever. You go through all these ridiculous questions. And like you said, at the end of the day, sometimes, bad things happen to good people, and we never know the reasons. So these narratives of having other people that have been there, it sounds like are helpful.
I think so. And, especially when you talk about miscarriages, are often we don't have an answer. And, as many as 2/3 of all stillbirths, we don't ever have any kind of an answer. And so those moms especially, and the dads too, but especially for those moms that don't ever have a reason of what happened to their child, it's very devastating. But I do think that sense of community and knowing that it's such a universal emotion for parents experiencing these types of losses.
Well, can you talk about your Star Legacy Foundation and why you started it and when?
We really didn't start out to necessarily create an organization, so it still kind of cracks me up a little bit when I think back on this. But about 6 months after my son Garrett was stillborn, I came out of a little bit of a fog and decided that I wanted something more positive to come from this experience. And because I had by that time realized the lack of research around stillbirth and the education and I'm involved in that, I knew I wanted to look into those areas primarily. I was fortunate in that I received very, very good support. I didn't want to replicate what was being happened there, but I really saw the need in this research and education area. And we initially started this by having a small fundraiser in our son's name and would donate the money to researchers who were doing very, very good work, but were kind of siloed all around the world and doing some other individual pieces. We started very small. The first several years was just simply the fundraising events, and it grew many, many years later. I found comfort in that growth as years went by, because then I had energy and the strength in later years to do it a little bit more, but also I feel like I realize the therapeutic value in it for me. Certainly, it's not a good approach for everyone, but it was for me, and I was blessed with many, many, many volunteers and others, including our board and our medical advisory team, and so many who kind of felt compelled to do some efforts in the same type of efforts. And so we now have a much larger team that I'm so grateful for, and they've really kind of helped it grow. My work is still in pediatrics, but I've learned a lot more about obstetrics over the last 11 years for sure.
Tell people how they can find your website.
It is www.starlegacyfoundation, all one word, .org. We try to be a source of information and education and support for people. And if there's something that you're looking for that you don't find there, please shoot us a note, because we love to try to help people connect with some of the experts in different areas, or try to help some of these families get answers if at all possible.
Could you give a couple of pieces of advice to somebody who has had a stillbirth, and early advice, and then maybe a little advice for down the road?
Sure. I think it's a little bit different for everyone, but I think finding some way to incorporate the child into your life has been very healing for a lot of people. I think with any type of child loss, one of parents' biggest fears is that their child will be forgotten. And so sometimes it's little things that we can do to help us know that our child is still with us. And sometimes it's big things. Sometimes it's wearing a piece of jewelry. Sometimes it's knowing a particular symbol makes you think of that child. So those kinds of things can be very powerful. And for stillbirth families in particular, because so many of them are still in childbearing ages and go on to have additional children, we have a lot of recommendations and things for the emotional care and the physical care of any of those subsequent pregnancies. And so certainly I would encourage people in that type of a situation to ask lots of questions and to reach out for support, because it is very different from pregnancies previous to loss.
How can I help them?
Again, I think recognizing that there's a fear that the child will be forgotten. So use the child's name, ask about them, let them tell their story if and when they're ready. And then, some of it is kind of what we tend to recognize as normal responses to grief support, as far as help them with what they can. If they're older children, offer to take them for ice cream to give the parents some time alone if they need to, or offer to make the meals, or, take the dog to the vet. Those menial tasks that don't seem like a big deal, but can be very overwhelming and very taxing on a family that's in the acute stages of grief. As it becomes a little bit further out, I think just finding ways to remember that baby and remember that it's still a big part of their life. Having another child or having, any other kind of major life event does not necessarily make this go away.
I think that's a good point, Lindsey, because, people, it's interesting because when people find out you've had a stillbirth or a miscarriage, they want to know if you have gone on to have other children, or how many children you have that are surviving. And it kind of minimizes the fact that you had a loss, I think, oftentimes.
many families, myself included, that 5 years later, when you see the school bus come through the neighborhood, you still get that little twinge because you know there should be another 5-year-old going off to kindergarten. And those types of milestones that you miss will continue for a long time to come. I heard a story once that was so touching about a father who was walking his surviving daughter down the aisle, and it got to him that the maid of honor was not his other daughter. And so these are emotions and memories that stick with us the rest of our lives.
And I want to close the show by talking about husbands, because you just mentioned a dad walking him down the aisle. Talk a little bit about what they need and what we can do for them.
Right. Dads really do have a very different experience with a lot of these forms of pregnancy loss. And so because so much of it is the physical things that are happening with the mother and having to deliver or having to, go through whatever kind of physical treatments are needed, so much of the attention is on mom. And while there's certainly an element that's appropriate, we can't forget the dads. And often the dads are the ones that get asked, well, how is mom doing? And a lot of times they just need someone to say, how are you doing? And that gets overlooked a lot. Sometimes, depending on the scenario, in these stillbirth or prematurity, early neonatal deaths, the dads are also fearful for mom's health, because sometimes, either as a cause or an effect, mom's health is in jeopardy. And so they are suddenly, facing the fear of losing both their child and their spouse or their partner. And that's very, very traumatic and very scary, and a very lonely feeling for them as well. In the immediate days, a lot of times dads will find more comfort in finding things to do. So sometimes we see them taking on the role of making funeral arrangements or contacting funeral homes or contacting family, doing some of the tasks that are appropriate. But we also know that at some time they need to be allowed to grieve themselves. And sometimes it's really helpful for other dads to reach out to them so that they know what's normal for dads to feel.
Yeah,
and
to
give them an outlet, because they feel so much responsibility for taking care of and supporting and protecting the mother that they don't take care of themselves as often.
Yeah. Well, Lindsey, thank you so much for being on the show today. I mean, you are an amazing person, and what you've gone on to do is just great. Well, we want to thank everybody for listening today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours till you find your own, and God bless.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Doctors Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.